Hello everyone, it's Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming coming at you with another video. Today I'm actually going to be talking about the Witcher RPG. The Witcher RPG. It's a game that I was leading up to. I've been reviewing Witcher this month, and it's about time that I talked about it. So here we go. The Witcher RPG. Now you all know that I'm a fan of The Witcher. If you haven't been paying attention to the videos that have been coming out this month, I'm a fan of The Witcher books and the TV show, the comics, but I haven't really read or played the video game. So that is going to throw off part of what I have to say because it's very clear that this book right here was based on the video game and not the books. And I know that for a fact because there were some things that were very weird about it. Like every example it gave in the book, it kept referencing, like almost every single one of them references neckers. And I had no idea what the heck a necker was. I had to go Google it and found out that it's actually like a low-level common monster that occurs in all three of the Witcher games. I did not know that at all. Like I didn't know what that was. But more so on page 175 of the book, when it starts talking about the monsters that are in the books rather than the video games, it actually indicates that Cody Pondsmith, the core writer of the game, is a very big fan of video games and has never read the book. He actually expressly states that. So that was, at least they came forward and said that in the book because there were some confusing things that I was finding. And then when I got to the monster section, it was like, most of the common monsters that appear in the books, like Bruxas and Drowners and I don't know, Rusalkas, for example, there was no mention of those for whatever. Well, there was Bruxas because they're a type of vampire, so that was in the category of vampires. But otherwise, like some of the things that The Witcher encounters a lot more frequently in the books didn't appear in the monster manual section of this book because they don't appear in the video games, so that makes sense now. Once I knew that, and again, it made more sense. So just going to throw that out there that obviously there's going to be some skewed response from me, but I do have some feedback from one of my players who's a huge fan of the video games, so that'll help with the review. But overall, just laying it out there, overall this game is simple in its core gameplay. And its core gameplay is legitimately just rolling a d10 and then adding a modifier to that d10 roll to find out if you succeeded beating a difficulty challenge number. So the game master might set a difficulty challenge number of 20 or 16 or 18 or some other number. And then you just roll a d10 and you will add some numbers to that d10 roll to find out if you succeeded. Now the numbers you add are going to be some modifier based on your weapon, for example, but mostly it's going to be a skill because legitimately everything in this game is a skill. There's no special abilities. There's no real things that are just stuff you can do. Everything you do is a skill. So, for example, maybe an example from the Witcher pre-gen or the Witcher character that we made for the Witcher player, he had parrying arrows as a thing, and you would think that would just add to his normal swordsman skill roll or whatever, but it actually wasn't. It's its own skill that he rolls to see if he parries arrows. So he rolls the parry arrow skill roll. Or one of the players made an elven archer, but then he went down the path of the special defining skills for the man-at-arms, in which he got to do cool things, like he got to shoot two shots. It's a twin shot, which is technically its own skill and not archery. So his benefits that he got from the elven benefit for being good at archery didn't really apply in those situations because technically they shouldn't. Now there's a discussion about whether we could have home ruled that or house ruled that it does apply because it is still archery, but technically according to the way that the rules are written, that is not the archery skill and therefore the benefit doesn't apply. So it's a thing like that where everything in this game is a skill and there are no special abilities. All of the special abilities, quote unquote, are just skills that have ranks. And so your rank in that special ability is what you would add to that d10 roll to see if you succeeded in the action. It's a very simple system at its core. Basically, it's really, really simple to do everything in the game. You want to throw some magic, then you make the magic roll for it, for casting magic, and then you would spend the stamina cost if you succeeded, and then you did the spell, right? So very simple system at its core, but there's a whole lot of weirdness that happens when you get into everything as a skill. For example, there's a lot of skills. There's a ton of skills, and you have very few skill points. Now, granted, the overall addition that you would add to the D10 roll includes the stats. So you'd have like swordsmanship is a reflex skill, so you would add 1d10 plus reflex plus the rank you have in swordsmanship, and that's the number that you would add. But then it creates this sort of weird system of like you have a base number, and then you have and that's it. Your base number is what they call everything combined. So your stat plus skill is your base number, which is kind of confusing because you would think your base number would be the stat or the skill, and then you would add something to that, but that's not how it is. That's like a combined number. But then it also has places where things are based off of specifically the stat. So you can see I'm getting really complicated saying it's a simple system, but then it's got complications, and that is its biggest problem. So this game overall, like the gameplay is legitimately that simple. Roll a d10, find out if you beat that difficulty number. Very simple, but there's all these little caveats and things that made us do a lot of math, as it were. So let me just give you some like feedback from my players, and then you can hear my rest of my review. So one thing that my players said, I just have a list, so I'll just go through them. There need to be more specific about the gear items and what they do, which is a very, very important thing to note. In the gear section, you have all this gear. You have lanterns and bullet lanterns and torches and candles and tents and bags and all this stuff, just like your typical Dungeons and Dragons sort of gear list. Just this giant list of things: horses, carriages, barding, meals, all this stuff on this gear list. But then there's just like flavor text description. There's not really like what they do. So there was no real like understanding of what the difference between a lantern and a bullet lantern was. How much light does one give off? Does the other one help for stealth things, or is a candle better than a torch, right? Like we would assume that it was, but there's no real understanding. There's no real explanation of what those things do aside from like all of the light items provide light, and the tent goes, it's a tent, you sleep in it. But what does that do? Does it help me with cold weather? Does it gain any benefit for resting? Like what happens with these items? So that was a good argument, or a good note that somebody made. The same person also said that the armor system is a bit weird, and I'll cover that in a little bit. It needs to be reworked. They also said the crafting system is a bit weird, needs to be reworked. I will cover all of that, which is independent from my review on the thing. She also said that. Several of the players said that the gameplay system was relatively easy, but character creation was a mess. That reworking character creation would make the game way more user-friendly, or way more friendly for non-people who are not used to the system, so first-timers to the system, which is actually a specific note from one of the players that said that the character creation is not user-friendly, but the game overall is okay if you're experienced at non-D&D games. So if you came at it from D&D, you would be all kinds of lost, and that's fair. So people who are experienced at non-D&D games probably have a little bit of an easier time getting through the character creation than those that are just coming from like 5e or something. And then another note was that the monster challenge rating seemed very far off the mark, and that's true. I ran a pre-made adventure, and they took the monster down in a couple of rounds by hooking it with some rope hooks and then just slaughtering it. That's just what happened. But it was supposed to be a very hard challenge for a group of 4, and it really didn't seem like that. So even with the half damage it was taking, because a lot of the attacks were coming from non-silvered items, which is a very specific caveat for monsters. All monsters are vulnerable to silver, but like essentially they take half damage from any non-silver source. Even with that, when you have like 4 people shooting at a monster that's just trying to break free from its bonds, it will die very quickly, and that's what ended up happening. And it was really a matter of like I kept rolling to see if the monster would break the bonds, and it didn't. It just didn't beat the DC that was set from the ropes and stuff. So, and it wasn't set very high. I had set the DC on it for 20, and it had a plus 14, so it just needed to roll a 6 or better, and it kept rolling very low. So I was like, well, this sucks. So yeah, so that's a thing. Then, all right, so let's talk about the book overall. So that's the book right there. The couple of things I have to say, the layout is actually okay. It's a little simplistic, but it's fine. There's some weirdness. There's all these like sidebars that are on the side, and those were kind of strange for me. You'd have like the text, and then they'd have a sidebar which would explain some piece of the text, and I was like, why didn't you just include that in the paragraph that you have here? You already have like a half a page of explanation. Why don't you just include this like 3 sentences that you have as a sidebar in there. It's not really any reason for it to be a sidebar, and that happened a lot. And about half of the sidebars were just flavor text, and I'm like, okay, well that's fine, I guess. But it was like this kind of distracting. You'd have like the center, and you'd have everything there, and then you have a sidebar on like every page. There's pretty much no page where there's not some random sidebar, some of which contains actual text, and some of it contains like flavor text. So this marginal text stuff was really, really kind of annoying. But overall, like, because of that text, it was like everything was pretty uniform. There was no like extra scrolls or kind of like interesting artwork on the sides. It was like the text and art and text, page of art, then text, right? Like that kind of thing. But otherwise, there wasn't really any issues. It was easy to read, except for some parts where like they'd have like the main title of like a spell, and then the text under it would be like 3 fonts smaller, and that would happen for a lot of things. So the skills would be the same, like big label for the skills, and then 3 font smaller text, which is not the size of the normal text. The normal text would be regular size font, and then this would be this shrunken font for some reason. Don't know why they chose to do that, but it didn't make it unreadable. It was just kind of strange to flip a page and then have like these 2 different layers of font on the page and then a sidebar. So that's my thing about the layout, but otherwise it was pretty simple to follow. However, there was an organizational problem that I do think was kind of big, like for anyone who's trying to approach it. So you have like pre-gen characters right at the start, totally fine. The how to play section is kind of right at the front. There's like, it's broken up, but they broke it up in a weird way. Like you had to go through the book to essentially find out how to do each of the pieces, which is fine. If you have a crafting system and then that's where it explains crafting, and you have nowhere else where it sort of references how to do crafting, that's fine. I'm okay with that. But it was kind of strange to like not have things like just bullet pointed out being like, this is the core rule of that or something, which happened a few times. But like, for example, how many character creation points you start with was actually just in the paragraph about character creation. So you have to read the whole paragraph. You can't just see like a bullet point says you have 44 points to put into skills. It's like you have to read, and then like, there's just like, and so when you make a character, you will use 44 points to create your character. And I was like, okay, thanks. That would have been nice to have just had that bullet pointed out. But the real problem was that it split up things. So you'd have, after the pre-gen characters, there was like the archetypes that you essentially are going to make, and it's like these are the things that they have. This is like they've got access to magic, right, or something, and it would be like these are the skills that are their key skills. And so you have to put your character points into those skills, and then you have these like pickup points later that you can put into any skills. It doesn't have to be those key ones, but you have to put your 44 points into those key skills, and then like a defining skill that is specific for that archetype. And it's like the defining skills have these 3 branches that you can use. Like if you put skill points into them, when you put 5 into one, you unlock the next tier of that branch. And then you put 5 into that, you unlock the next tier, etc. And those can be as high as you want them to be, essentially up to 10 or 6 for a starting character, but like they can keep going after you've made your character and you're developing your character. But you go down these branches, and it's like, okay, that's cool. But then it puts the branches really far away for each of the defining skills. So the Bard tree is several dozen pages later, and the Witcher tree is way in the back of the book. And so I don't know why they decided to split the defining skill trees away from the archetype itself, but that's what they did. So that was a bit of a weird one to be like, okay, well, I'm making a bard, I'm going to put these points into these things. Let me skip ahead about 10 pages or 20 pages or so to find the bard skill trees and those branches, and then figure out what it is I want to do for this character. So that was the thing. And like you link the stat to the skill, like I said before, when you do the skill roll, but it actually really doesn't specifically say that, which is very strange. I had to figure that out actually from a YouTube video that explained that. I was like, oh, and then I went back and I was trying to figure it out. It doesn't expressly state that you add the stat plus skill. It does kind of, but it doesn't tell me to like combine them until you get to like the descriptions of the skills. And then it says, there's a sidebar that says when it references your base number, it means your stat plus skill, because all things are stat plus skill. And I was like, well, okay, there it is. But like, it's not very clearly written out in the rules and text. It's in a sidebar in the section on skills, which is a very weird place to put a core rule for the game. Yeah. So that was sort of a thing with its layout and its character creation. You get into like you get to choose some gear based on your archetype, and then you have to buy gear. And then they are like, oh yeah, you're not going to really have a lot of gold, so you're only going to have some gear. And that was true, but I think that was the attempt to make it complicated for some reason, just make it so that you don't have like a bunch of gear. So then you have to rely on the crafting system, which would be fine if the crafting system also wasn't weirdly complicated. So when you go to craft something in this game, it says you need 3 things, but when you actually read the text, you actually need 6 things. The 3 things it says you need are a diagram of the thing that you're crafting, whether you have that physically or have memorized it from somewhere. So you can't craft things that you don't know about. Like you can't make a thing on the fly. If you decide, for example, you're going to put fish hooks on the end of arrows and try to use them to catch fishes, technically, according to the rules, since you don't have a diagram, you have to make a diagram. And then once you've made a diagram, then you can go ahead and craft it. But then it's like, okay, what skill do I use to make a diagram? Is it the crafting skill, the same skill I have to roll to like make it? Like, what do I do? So that's not super well defined. But anyway, it says you need a diagram of the thing that you're making or have it memorized. You need the components that are listed on the diagram. Okay, so we're back to this diagram. It's going to tell me I need 2 pieces of timber and 8 pieces of iron and 1 fish line, right? So this is the diagram is going to tell me I need these components. And then I have to have those components, but it doesn't say that. It just says, it says, oh yeah, that I need the components. So I have to, like, the diagram has to tell me the components, and then I have to have those components. And then I have to make a successful crafting roll. So those are the 3 things it tells me I need to do to craft a thing. But then it also later says that you really can't craft if you don't have a forge or the tools. So you need tools and a forge. Okay, so that's 5 things. And then it goes, and then you will spend the required amount of time. So that's 6 things that I need in order to craft something. So I have to be able to have the time. Like I can't craft a fish line on the end of an arrow on the fly. Like I can't do it. I need time to do it, and that time will be 1 hour, 3 hours, whatever. That's okay. But when it expressly states in the crafting section I need 3 things, and then it tells me I also need 3 other things in order to craft something. So that was a bit of a weird thing. Okay. And if you fail to roll in crafting, you don't just go, well, I didn't make it. You actually like lose the stuff that you were using. So you have to go out and find these things. You have to go salvage and scavenge and find these items that you need. You need to find timber, you need to find silver, you need to find a fishing line. So it's like, okay, I know I need those things. I don't have them. I have to go find them. So you go out and find them. Then you come back and you make at the forge with your tools, and you make the crafting roll. And if you fail, you have lost all that stuff. It's all gone. And so you have to go back out and do it again. So this is their way of trying to make the game complicated, but it also turns into like this weird grind of salvaging. You got to go out and salvage more of these specific items, and these specific items have to be found in specific areas. You can't just find them. There's no just like basic, I make a salvage roll and I find the things I'm looking for. No. You have to salvage in a specific area, and then the game master has to decide whether or not you found those things based on the area where you were salvaging. You can't just find silver in the pockets of people you've killed, for example. So you need to go out and find those things. So you lost them. Unless the game master uses the optional rule, which it sort of seems like they probably didn't originally create that, and then after playtesting they were like, oh, we need to create something. The optional rule is when you fail the crafting roll, you can make the crafting roll again, which would be a successful crafting roll, because if you fail that, nothing happens. But if you make a successful crafting roll the second time, you recover 1/2 of the items you were using to craft. So if I needed 2 timber and 5 silver and 1 fishing line, I make the roll and I'll get like 1 timber back, 2 silver, and maybe the fishing line, depending on whether or not the GM is being nice. If I succeed in that second roll. So it's like, okay, so I make 2 rolls essentially. If the first one fails, I make a second roll. If the second one succeeds, great. I didn't lose everything, but I still didn't craft the item I was trying to craft. Okay. Yeah, and then if you want to try to gain items from the stuff, if you have some items, you have some arrows and you have some silver and things like that, you want to go, okay, well, if I break these down, I'll get the items. Yeah, sort of. When you break them down, you get 1/2 of the items that are in them. So you don't get all of them. So there's that. The other thing to know, and this is my last piece, and then I'll just tell you what I overall think of it. There's combat in this game was a little bit weird. It seems like it's a simple opposed roll because that's what it says. When I go to stab somebody, they defend themselves. Okay, so we both roll and then see what happens. But instead of making the game like something like V5 where I roll and we both determine what we want to do, and then we both are just going to roll, and if whoever gets the higher success or whatever wins. That is not how it goes. So I will attack. It's a lot more like Maximum Apocalypse. I will attack and you will defend. And then if you succeed. If I succeed, then I hit you. If you succeeded, then I didn't hit you, and then you can turn around and hit me back, which is fine. I had no problem with that. That's very core and key. But then it throws in things like, oh, well, you also have weapon accuracy. Now we have another modifier. So we have the D10 plus stat plus skill plus the weapon accuracy number, which is another modifier, and then any modifiers that come from the situation. So our number might go up or down, and then then we roll and see who gets the higher number, and then that works. But then, if I succeed in hitting you, I don't just do damage. I have to then roll a hit location, which will then potentially cause me to have a multiplier to the damage. If I hit something in the head, if I hit you in the head, then you will take 3 times the damage that I roll. If I hit you in the leg, you'll take half of the damage that I rolled. But then there's no effect unless it's a critical damage type situation, which I'll cover in a second. So I just do the half damage. That's it. So so this is actually what happened in a fight with a warg, which is a modified wolf. In a fight with a warg, the Witcher ended up doing the killing blow to it on its hind end, and that's what killed it. Because they did enough damage after it had taken some damage from the arrows and things that it had gotten shot with in the torso. The hind end tail actually technically is what it was on the roll. The tail end took the killing blow, which kind of felt weird for both the player who was playing the Witcher and myself, because I couldn't figure out how to story-wise explain why the wolf died when the Witcher cut off its tail. No real explanation for that. But if you do, there's 4 levels of critical. If you do 7 over, 10 over, 13 over, 15 over, there's a different level of critical damage you do. So if the attacker, me, if I did 7 over your defense roll, then I get a minor critical. If I did 10 over, a more major critical, 13 over serious critical, 15 over lethal critical, right? And then I have this table of critical thing that I roll, and it doesn't necessarily just do more damage. It actually does an effect, which then causes problems. So some of them, like the lethal ones, some of them are instant death, but some of them are in the weaker ones are just oh, now they have a -1 to their reflexes or something like that, which is fine, in a way. Now this is still just on the simple side. I'm still not even getting into the really complex stuff, because you also have armor, which has the stopping power, which negates damage that you take, but every time there's damage to the armor, it drops by 1, and the weapon will take damage, and it'll drop by 1 in its reliability. So both of those will eventually break. So that's a thing. But then there's also, when you attack, you can choose to do a fast attack, which would be you get to do 2 attacks, and if they both hit, you do damage on both of them. Or a strong attack, where you do 1 heavy damage attack, which does double the damage that you roll. So we have these multipliers, the hit location multipliers, the double damage multipliers from strong attack. But the strong attack, so effectively they would be the same. If you hit with 2 fast attacks, you would do the same amount of damage as if you just doubled your damage from the 1 attack, sort of. But then the strong attack has a negative modifier to your roll. So you would go, all right, so I've got the D10 plus stat plus skill plus weapon accuracy plus situational modifier plus a -3 because it's a strong attack. And so you have these really sort of long build-up chains of math that you have to do before you can determine whether or not you even succeeded in beating the other person's defensive thing. And they don't have nearly that kind of stuff. They just have their D10 plus stat plus skill roll. And that's it. So it creates this sort of weird situation of various levels of things that are happening that cause the combat to really kind of break down a little bit. And then suppose you get a wound, which is when you take more damage than a certain number that was previously determined by one of your stats. If you take more damage than that, then all of your stats halve for the time being. So during the rest of the combat, you have half of those stats, which then affects your D10 plus stat plus skill roll to do any of the things that you're doing. And so it created this sort of weird layer, and we ended up forgetting about critical damage and wounds when we were trying to roll through this combat, because even with the big monster, because it just kind of started to bog everything down, and I didn't even remember them until a little bit later, and by the time I remembered them, they should have applied, and so some of the people should have been half damage and stuff, which leads to that conversation about the monster challenge rating being wrong, potentially, but the monster absolutely would have been in that same situation where it would have been doing far worse than it did, because in the first round it would have taken a wound, and then it would have had half of all of its stats, because in the first round the player hit pretty hard. And so So yeah. So anyway, there's all of that, and that doesn't even get into verbal combat, which has its own layer of complication and is an optional rule. So the situation, like there's lots of empathy stats, lots of stats that are like socially oriented, lots empathy skills. Sorry, empathy skills that are situationally oriented, trying to convince people to do things, and it leads to verbal combat. But verbal combat is an optional rule that the game master doesn't have to use for the game. So all of the stuff that was complicated with that, I won't really talk about it because it's an optional rule, but it does mean that in the core of the game, there's not really any reason to be doing social challenges. Like, it assumes that you're going to try to stab somebody rather than try to talk them down. If you try to talk them down, then you have this verbal combat optional rule that the game master may say. It doesn't matter. So then, okay, well, is it success or failure? I guess. But then it's verbal. All this verbal stuff sort of is far more powerful than the stabbing stuff. So it creates this like weird level of like, if you're a social character, you just win whenever you succeed, instead of doing like the, okay, well then it resists with this or that, or whatever. So at 26 minutes, I shall give you my final review of the game. My final review of the game is that it's a mediocre game. It is not a super impressive, awesome game. It is a game that, if you really love the Witcher world, is fun for you. If you're a fan of the video game, I guess people who are fans of the video game, and this is what I was told by the person who's a fan of the video game, it represents the video game decently. So for those that are fans of the video game and you want to turn it into a tabletop RPG, then great. But for everyone else, it's sort of middle of the road. You can do Witcher world stuff, but it would probably be easier for you to take the Witcher world and adapt it to a different system. Because some of the things just don't kind of make sense. There's this whole like loosey-goosey system of like looting and salvaging, and whether or not people find the things that they need. Overall, it sort of harps quite a bit on like the themes of the world, which are supposed to be hardship. But like it just feels like it's a really kind of clunky system to make that happen. You're spending more time trying to math out whether or not you succeeded or failed at something to really get into the story of hardship. The combat is hard and takes a long time to get used to. It'll get better, obviously, the more I do it, but it was just like I just skipped a whole bunch of stuff because it was just too much going on all at once. As was described by one of the players, she only imagines the nightmare fuel it was for me to try to run the combat in the game, because it was hard for her to figure out what was going on or how to do the things exactly. And I was over here trying to manage all four players doing different things, musical stuff and fighting stuff and Witcher stuff. So overall, I would give the game one thumb for doing stuff in the Witcher world, but not a second thumb. I can't give it a second thumb. That's just how it is. And so that's my review on the Witcher game. If you want to message me or talk to me about it, that's totally fine. I welcome that. But if you're going to message me about it, like, please have some informational like response instead of just like, well, I love the game. Well, that's fine. You can love the game. You can love the game all day long. And I'm not saying it's super bad. I'm just saying that like it could have been better, right? There could have been a lot more streamlined things. Some levels of complication that just seem to be in there for no reason. I mean, yeah, that's sort of how I felt about it. So that's it. That's my review of the Witcher game. One thumb. Play it if you want to. If you invite me to play it, I'll probably play it as a player to see what's different from not having to worry too much about all of the crazy things in the background. But I will wish you serious luck for running it for me. And that's about it. That's about all I have to say. So I hope that everyone has a good day, week, month, or year, and that you enjoy some Witcher things. Have a good night.